George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
What? Foreign Secretary? They want me to join the government. Why not? Grant Shapps, if that's what he's still calling himself, is your new Home Secretary, fellow Britons. What a night it's going to be. The British government is collapsing in real time as we are live on air. The second British government to collapse in 3 months. Putin must go, said the British 3 prime ministers ago. Assad must go, said the British government 5 prime ministers ago. You really couldn't make it up. And you don't have to, because we will be keeping you up to date with the Manchester United score and the even more important score at Westminster, where absolutely farcical scenes have just been witnessed and apparently filmed on mobile phones. The venerable, right honourable Jacob Rees-Mogg being manhandled and cursed and sworn at, and given he's 168 years old, that is a touch disrespectful, don't you think? There were fists flying. The chief whip and the deputy chief whip both resigned. The government said it was a confidence motion, then that it wasn't a confidence motion, and then Liz Truss didn't even vote in her own confidence motion. It's very hard to follow all of this, especially for overseas audience, but we'll do our best to explain. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Welcome to the mother of all talk shows, now on midweek as well as on Sunday. Thanks to our good friend Ravi, our chief sponsor this evening and one of 2 sponsors from next week. Without Ravi, we wouldn't be here on a Wednesday night. And you no longer have to donate after this week, because we're only sponsored for the first hour this week. We need your donations on the super chat and on the website. But next week will be fully sponsored and no longer require your exceedingly generous help. What a night. I thought that the main subject tonight would be the war in Ukraine, which is intensifying and perhaps about to move into a decisive phase. But the collapse of the British government, which is up to its neck in the Ukraine war, in fact, much beyond its neck, right over its mouth and nose, and drowning its own people because of its involvement in the Ukraine war, is now itself expiring in real time. I thought that it might be possible that the government would fall by the time that we came off air this evening. I'm waiting for a word in my ear that the government has fallen at the beginning of the mother of all talk shows. Let's try and recap. Liz Truss sacked her Chancellor of the Exchequer. For overseas viewers, that's the second most important position in the government, the next door neighbour of the British Prime Minister, who lives at number 10, the Chancellor at number 11, interconnecting doorways in each other's ear all the time. And the reason, proximate reason, for the downfall of Kwasi Kwarteng, no need to remember how to pronounce his name. You'll never hear anything about him again. He only lasted 38 days in office. And the proximate reason was that he had introduced a mini budget which the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, at the time of my speaking to you, didn't like the policies that he outlined in that mini budget, which was unusual because he must have told her what was going to be in the mini budget. Even more unusual because what was in the mini budget was precisely what Liz Truss had campaigned to become Prime Minister on. Now, Kwasi Kwarteng is out. A zombie called Jeremy Hunt, I have to say that very carefully, has been retreaded for a third time and is now the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Problem is, his political views on everything are diametrically opposed to his boss next door. It's going to make for interesting interconnected door conversations as long as Liz Truss remains at number 10, which must now be a matter of hours, perhaps days, but definitely not weeks. That was the big story midweek. Then, this afternoon, in advance of a confidence motion, that is to say, if the government had lost it, they would have gone to the country in a general election, which of course concentrates the minds of Conservative MPs considerably, as hundreds of them are currently scheduled to lose those seats in a general election. It was the ultimate gun at the head of Conservative MPs not to ban fracking, which the Conservatives, having promised in the general election they would ban, now want to resurrect, even though it will bring fire through a kitchen tap or a bathroom shower somewhere near you, at least on the basis of current science. So the Tories' U-turn on fracking was highly problematic for some Conservative MPs because they ran for office in their constituencies where fracking was a clear and present danger and promised their electors that there would never be any fracking on their doorstep. And how were they going to get re-elected if they U-turned on that and the flames started coming out of people's water faucets, as you call them, in the United States? Controversial? Yes, but nobody expected what happened next. The Home Secretary, that's the Interior Secretary, the person in charge of everything that happens inside the borders of the British state, and perhaps, though not certainly, just outside in the English Channel, where the Home Secretary was under great pressure to stop the boats bringing hundreds of people, sometimes thousands of people, every day across the English Channel from war-torn France, where they were in fear of persecution and perhaps death. Not. They were climbing into dinghies under the gaze of the French security forces and sailing across the Channel, and when they land, courtesy of all British institutions, from the Royal Navy to the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, they're whisked away, not to jail, not to a camp, but to a 4-star hotel, increasingly near you, and put up at £80 per night per person for an indeterminate period, almost certain to last for years. The Home Secretary wanted to stop that. Her name is Suella Braverman, KC as they call them now, King's Counsel, formerly Queen's Counsel, a young woman who, as the name suggests, is rather bold and even frisky. She wanted to do something about immigration in Britain. But Liz Truss, who ran on that very platform, is a very different Liz Truss now. Effectively, Britain has a Conservative government now for which it hasn't voted. It voted for Boris Johnson and his amanuensis, about whom more later, whose departure led to the beginning of the end for Boris Johnson, and now has a Conservative government that looks almost the diametric opposite, politically speaking. it's liberal, it's Remainer, it's woke, it's soft. It wants more immigrants, not fewer. And it wants better relations with the European Union, not poorer. And it is absolutely in lockstep with both the United States and the European Union on all matters of foreign policy. So back to the lobbies in the House of Commons this evening. Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg, the member for the 19th century, was mobbed and scragged, as they say, in Britain's private schools by the hoi polloi from the Red Wall, which returned Conservative MPs during the 2019 general election under the leadership of Boris Johnson for the first time, sometimes for 100 years, sometimes for longer. The Red Wall MPs are utterly furious with Jacob Rees-Mogg and the state of things inside the Conservative Party. So poor Jacob got scragged, he got mobbed. They were cursing and swearing. I don't want to use the words, but think of F, think of off, think of every word you can say to a toff like him that would wound and hurt him. That's exactly what they were doing. And it all ended up with a very comfortable Conservative government win, 96 votes of a majority, even better than their notional parliamentary majority. So you wonder what all the fuss was about, especially as it's now cost the jobs of both the Chief Whip and the Deputy Chief Whip. And as I gave you in the breaking news right at the beginning, a man called Grant Shapps is now the Home Secretary. I have to check because he's had 3 names in the time he's been in Parliament. Yes, he's a man with multiple identities, and he's now in charge of Britain's police force. He's a man that had to change his name, so dodgy were his business activities. He's a man that falsely represented himself as called one thing when he was actually called something else, who ran a kind of Ponzi scheme that promised you that you would get rich if only you followed his advice. But because that's not how it worked out, he had to change his name. And he's now the British Home Secretary. At least he was at the time I started to speak. My phone is on. I'm ready, Liz. If you'll give me the Foreign Secretaryship with plenipotentiary powers to end the war, to recognize Palestine, to sail an independent course for the British state, to make up with China and Russia and Iran and Venezuela and all the other countries that you have gratuitously offended over the last 12 years now of Conservative government, I'm prepared to take the job. But I'm not going to give up the mother of all talk shows because I've got 2 cracking guests this evening. Gonzalo Lira from the front line in Ukraine. He's up right after this very short break.
You know, and it's a very, thank you for, you know, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, you know. I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary McLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, you know, haggis. Look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
This is the very last time you'll be able to donate to the mother of all talk shows, because this is the very last night that we don't have 2 sponsors for the entire midweek show. How about that then? Thanks to all of you who have given. About £45,000 has been donated in Super Chat and on the website since we began accepting donations. And if you're one of the people that made that figure possible, you saved the mother of all talk shows. But this is your last night to write yourself into the roll of honor, which will be published and kept forever. One day it will be chiseled onto marble. So get donating, why don't you? If you're watching on YouTube, and if you are watching on YouTube, take a second now, both to like the show and to subscribe to my channel, neither of which will cost you a penny, but will help me algorithmically quite considerably. So if you're on YouTube, buy Super Chat, make a donation. It's your very last chance. If you're not on YouTube, go to our website, moats.tv, and donate there. Joanne Nairi, who's been a regular donor, Joanne, donated 10 euros. George, I've been watching the mother of all talk shows for a little over 3 years, and my only regret is that I didn't discover your program sooner. Well, Joanne, better late than never. We've been going nearly 20 years. We're going to have a big party in Alexandra Palace when we get to our 20-year anniversary. VJ Bovan donated 10 British pounds. Thanks, VJ. Tara Watt, New Zealand dollars, 20. Thank you, Tara. Keep swinging, George. You and Russell Brand have done more to spread the truth than anyone else in the Western media. Bravo. Thank you. Mr. Lover, again a regular donor, gives £5. I will keep donating just in case a rainy day arrives with no sponsors. I love you, Mr. Lover. Now, the telephone numbers should be on the screen, for I don't have them. It falls to me to introduce our next guest, who's the man they couldn't hang. He's the man who's on the front line in Ukraine. That's right. And he speaks honestly and freely and truthfully as he sees it. He has no side. He's not on anybody's team. He's not being paid by anybody. Here's the numbers. If you're in the US and Canada, it's +1 844 944 3344. If you're in the UK or Ireland, it's 08 081 96 5522. Get calling now if you want to be on the show. Gonzalo Lira is one of our most widely watched guests. And last week, the mother of all talk shows was watched by 1.1 million people. I suspect we might even break that this week. No least thanks to Gonzalo Lira, who joins me now. Gonzalo, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. Very glad that you are safe and well, because it's all kicking off near where you are, isn't it?
Yeah, the war is turning in a very, very interesting direction, and I think that we've reached a turning point and that it won't continue much longer. Because the situation on the ground, insofar as what the Western media is saying, is that, the Zelensky regime's forces are on the doors of Moscow, but that's nonsense. Over the past 6 weeks, they've launched a series of offensives along the three fronts, Kherson, Zaporozhye, and Kharkov. And these offensives have been incredibly costly. They have lost so many lives. And the only quote-unquote victory that the Zelensky regime claimed and made a lot of hay out of was the offensive in Kharkov, in the Kharkov region. But when you actually look at what happened, the Zelensky regime forces essentially took open cow country, and there's nothing there, but they lost an enormous number of soldiers. It's credibly estimated that in the past 6 weeks, they have lost at least 18,000 men killed, and perhaps twice that number seriously wounded, incapacitated. And now they have assembled in two focal points. The focal point number one is the Battle of Bakhmut, which is a town. It's in the Lugansk region, and it's a key point of intersection of several rail lines and highways. Whoever grabs that city, which is in dispute right now, there's a fierce battle going on. It's been going on for a number of weeks. Well, once the Russian forces capture that town, they are going to be able to, what's known as flower out, because there are several roads that exit from Bakhmut. And so that seems that the Russian forces are going to be taking that town in the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks at most, but they will take it. The Wagner forces, which are the private military contractors that the Russian use, they're basically shock troops. They are on the outskirts of the city. Rumors say that they are actually in control of the southern half of the city, but there's fierce combat going on right now, so nobody's very clear about it. But it's indisputable that that city will be captured. And the issue is, of course, that there are 30,000 Zelensky regime forces there. And on the other hand, there is a very large grouping of Zelensky regime forces that are amassing around the city of Kherson, or just across from the city of Kherson. And they are about to launch, and in fact, as I'm speaking to you now, they are launching, as a matter of fact, a major offensive towards the city of Kherson. Now, the city of Kherson, if you recall, it was captured initially at the beginning of the war by the Russians. It was a very important operational objective because they wanted to break the dam that was preventing Crimea from getting water. And so they captured it initially, and they've held on to it this whole time very easily. And it was the first city where they implemented the use of the ruble. It was the first city where they started giving out Russian passports to the citizenry there. And now the Zelensky regime has amassed an estimated army of between 30,000 and 60,000 men, though the 60,000 seems a little bit over the top. It's more credible to say it's probably between the 30 and 40,000 man range. And they are going to launch a major offensive. They are, as I said, launching it as I speak. And this offensive, well, the issue is that, see, the best frontline troops that the Kiev regime had, they're gone. That army that they started the war with of 240,000 men, those combat troops have been destroyed. The men that the Kiev regime is throwing into the mix now that are going to be attacking from Kherson are what is known as territorial defense forces. These are second and third tier forces. They are under-equipped, under-trained, and basically it's going to be a human wave type of attack, which will be horrifying. It will be incredibly bloody, especially because the Kherson area where they are going to be attacking has been fortified over the last 7-8 months now by the Russians. So they're basically going to be throwing these waves of people against a solid wall, and it's going to be horrifying. And the thing is, see, a lot of people in the West, especially NATO, they insist that this offensive has to take place. It is very clear that Washington wants this offensive to take place before the midterm elections, which are on, I believe, the 7th of November. And so they are insisting that the Kiev regime throw these men into this battle for the city of Kherson, which is actually quite far away from the actual front lines. And these men are going to be slaughtered. And it's as simple as that. It's a tragedy, and it's being done for optics and the politics in the United States. And what has to be understood is that, you see, even if these waves of soldiers manage to advance somehow, and perhaps even take the city of Kherson, the Russians have already shown their absolute willingness to give up territory and evacuate their troops as well as civilians to save their men and save their equipment. And as they retreat, they inflict punishing losses on the attacking forces. Because, of course, when you are attacking, especially in the kind of terrain we're talking about here, which is steppe, it's just flat prairie land, well, when you attack, you expose yourself. And so these men who are going to be attacking towards the direction of Kherson, they're going to be exposed, just as what happened in Kharkov. In the town of Izium and the town of Liman, which is in the Kharkov region, the Zelensky regime forces attacked with everything. And the Russians simply pulled out. And they secured the vast majority of their men, the vast majority of their equipment. And as they retreated, they inflicted with their artillery and air power terrifying losses. It is credibly estimated that the Kharkov offensive cost the lives, not casualties, lives of at least 6,000 Zelensky regime forces, and the Russians suffered less than 100. I mean, it was that lopsided. And so in the West, they are talking about, that the Zelensky regime forces are going to break through to Kherson and they're going to go on the road to Crimea. This is nonsensical. They point in the West, in the Western media, the prostitute media of the West. They claim that the Russians are evacuated civilians because they believe that they're going to lose Kherson. That's not the reason. The reason they are evacuating civilians is that they know that the Zelensky regime forces are going to fire indiscriminately into the city of Kherson using those famous HIMARS missiles to inflict damage on the civilian population, as they have been doing for the last 8 years in the city of Donetsk. And so all of this attack on the city of Kherson, it'll probably destroy the city. And so that's why they removed all the civilians. Because quite frankly, as an army, it's just easier not to have civilians around so you can go ahead with your operations. And as I said, if the Russians feel that these advances are gaining ground, they will simply pull back. Because you have to understand a key issue. The Ukrainians have run out of men, and they are rapidly running out of weaponry. Why do you think they are going to the West begging for all kinds of weapons, whatever weapons they can get? Because they have simply run out, because, of course, those weapons have been destroyed. The original army has been destroyed. The only people who are fighting are territorial defense forces and also a lot of NATO contractors, because all of these foreign weapon systems that are being operated in Ukraine, well, it takes months to train for these weapons. And so it's impossible to get Ukraine soldiers to train on them as a practical matter in terms of time. And so the people operating this equipment have been NATO contractors. Probably they were NATO officers for the British, the French, the Greek, the American army last week. And then they just, quote unquote, resigned and signed the paper. And now they're private military contractors, and they're sent to Ukraine to operate these HIMARS systems, the M777s and whatnot. And so that's what you have fighting there. And these men are going to be decimated. It's going to be a slaughter. And even if they gain ground, which is a doubtful thing, but even if they do, swarming, sort of like zombies in one of those apocalyptic movies, well, they will eventually exhaust themselves. They will run out of men. And then the Russians will simply bend back and move forward. In fact, Lyman, which was the town that the Ukrainian armed forces captured 2-3 weeks ago, the Russians now are staging offensives on that town to recapture it. And they're fresh, whereas the Zelensky regime forces that are currently defending Lyman, they're exhausted. And so this is the war that's being fought. And the people in the West, the vast majority of civilians, not people like you and I who are neck deep in the information warfare, well, the people in the West do not seem to realize that all of their woes are not because of Russia. It's because of the Western leadership classes that bet it all on the Zelensky regime and defeating Russia. And they bet wrong. And they did all these sanctions that have backfired on them horribly. And that's why the people in Britain are going to go cold, dark, and hungry this winter. And I know that you're in the UK, and sincerely, I hope that things work out for you personally, George, because you know how much I appreciate you. But I'm telling you, it's going to be an ugly winter for the people of Europe, and they only have their own leadership to blame. Your leadership, the European leadership, is going to blame Putin, but it wasn't Putin that didn't want to negotiate. It wasn't Putin that cut off the supply of gas. It was the West, the Americans, who decided not to negotiate, that they were only going to accept total victory and regime change in Russia. It was the West, the EU, the British government of Boris Johnson and now Liz Truss, and the Biden administration, who all insisted on these draconian sanctions that only hurt the European people. And on top of that, as a final note, sort of like a cherry on the sundae, you have the fact that the Americans blew up the Nord Stream pipeline in a grotesque act of terrorism, and they have the gall to try to blame it on the Russians, when we all know, everyone knows, that the Americans did it, likely with the assistance of the United Kingdom and perhaps Poland, and it is going to push the European economy off a cliff. In fact, it already has. I mean, the European economy is already collapsing. It's already gone off the cliff. Now we're just waiting for the final splat when it hits the bottom, okay? And we're seeing the deindustrialization of Germany. We are seeing the deindustrialization of the United Kingdom. And all the subsidies, free money that the governments of Europe give its citizens to buy gas, to buy heating oil, to buy gasoline and whatnot, it's not going to matter, because at the end of the day, it's not an issue of not having the money. It's that there's no supply. There's no supply of gas. They had cheap energy from Russia for years, decades, in fact. And because of the sanctions, they literally cut off their nose to spite their face. And no amount of money is going to cure the fact that there is simply not enough energy to go around in Europe this winter. So to your listeners, if you're in Europe, I would tell you that you have to stock up on firewood, heating oil, whatever it is that you use, because it's going to be a very ugly winter. And that's what I have to tell you here from the front.
Gosh darn, how do you get this thing to work? Is it that one? Is it this one here? Gosh, was this thing built in America? Jeez. Kamala, would you get in here? I can't get the, gosh darn wireless to work.
You know I can't answer questions, Joe, when I'm laughing.
I'm trying to, listen to that Scottish guy on the wireless, the Galloway fella.
Oh, Joe, you're so funny.
I've been pressing this red button on and off and on and off. Heck, I can't get it to work. Hello, Biden residence.
Mr. President, be advised, we have executed the airstrike on Syria. Confirmed.
That's just great. How long until it gets delivered? I'm starving.
Let's take a call. Go ahead, Kenny.
Hi, George. Yeah, I just want to talk about the trans issue that you were speaking about earlier.
Yeah,
I've
go
got
ahead.
a book in front of me by Douglas Murray, and he's got a paragraph here that I'd just like to read out, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was standing on the corner at a quarter.
All right, get him off. He's a nutter. In the UK, it's 08081 965 522, and in the US, it's +1 844 944 3344.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. From the makers of Where's the WMDs? Who killed Epstein and pinned the blame on the Democratic donkey? Comes the brand new game, Where's Biden Hiding? Play the tapes. Figure out what the hell he's trying to say.
It is me, Joe Biden.
Try and find Where's Biden Hiding. Where's Biden hiding? We can't find him. This product is fictional and is not available in your local burn-down store. But seriously, if anyone finds him, please let us know.
Big thanks, obviously, to all our subscribers and listeners to the MOATS podcast. For the older amongst you, a podcast is the distilled version, about half as long, which has become a phenomenon on the internet. So it's a media phenomenon, and it's tearing up the mainstream media monopoly. Please download it on Apple or Spotify and leave us a 5-star review, like Sanam in London, who said, George, I've been watching your show for a long time, and I must admit that you are a true leader and very courageous man to carry on your work of exposing the truth and showing us the other side of the picture, which always gets blocked by the US and the West. through their media. God bless you always. Sanam in London. Very touching, Sanam. Thank you very much for that.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, that cyber attack failed because Gonzalo can just keep talking. He's got so much, so wise is he. He was able to cover for the fact that I was temporarily taken off the air. I'm only joking. I don't know if it was a cyber attack. I've absolutely no idea what it was, but I definitely disappeared from the mother of all talk shows. But Gonzalo, great sport that he is, kept on keeping on and is still there now. Gonzalo, I just wanted to make a couple of comments on the tremendous report from the front that you gave. First of all, it seems unlikely to me that the Russians will allow themselves to be defeated in Kherson. After all, as you say, it was so vital for the dam. It was the first place they gave out the Russian passports. Their reinforcements are arriving, presumably from the mobilization that they have done. And although the numbers you gave us earlier are big, and of course they're very, very serious, particularly the casualty numbers. But, you know, if they've got 30,000 soldiers there, well, if Russia can't field 40 or 50,000 soldiers to hold on to Kherson, questions would have to be asked about them. So my instinct tells me that Russia will turn Kherson into a Stalingrad.
Well, what happens in modern warfare, what we're seeing is that, there comes a tipping point moment where, and insofar as an offensive is concerned, there are so many soldiers being thrown at you that sometimes it's just inevitable that you have to pull back. And it's not that you're weaker or that you're quote unquote losing. It's just a smarter thing. For various specific operational reasons and tactical reasons, you sometimes want to prevent any small salient of your own men being captured, cut off from the main grouping. So it's reasonable and rational to pull back, and basically it's the Muhammad Ali rope-a-dope strategy of just leaning back on the ropes and letting the other guy tire himself out until he's absolutely exhausted, and then you just wake up and knock him out. And so this is a rope-a-dope strategy that the Russians are carrying out. I'm thinking that viewers our age, I'm in my early 50s, we all remember Muhammad Ali fighting against George Foreman, and that rope-a-dope strategy, where it's basically you're fighting but defending, and you're letting the other guy tire himself out. Yeah, that's what the Russians are doing. Now, the other thing that's going on is that the partial mobilization. You have to understand that when they called up 300,000 troops, and I personally believe it was probably higher because of anecdotal evidence and just the general movement in society in Russia, it's probably a lot more. I'm guessing it's closer to 500,000. The actual number has never been actually released by the authorization that the Russians signed, insofar as this is concerned. That part is classified. So anyway, the point is, these people who were called up in mobilization, they are not taking those civilians, giving them a week's training and sending them to the front in Ukraine. No. They take those men, they gave them a week or two of refresher training, because all the men mobilized are former soldiers. They were in the army. And they are sending them to other units within Russia, far from the combat, to relieve combat troops there. And those combat troops who are already in place, already up to snuff insofar as training and equipment is concerned, those are the ones who are being sent to the Ukrainian front. And already it's credibly estimated that about between 60 and 80,000 men are in the region of Kherson, Russians, from this mobilization. So they've already made a massive move already. Okay, and so you have to understand that in modern warfare, you can, in any kind of industrial warfare, really, it's perfectly fine to give up territory, because as Clausewitz teaches us, you don't fight terrain, you fight armies. What terrain you capture doesn't matter. What matters is that if you destroy the opposing army. And that's what the Russians have been doing very systematically from the very get-go of this conflict, especially after the breakdown of negotiations in March, early April. You see, the Russians have deliberately been aiming to degrade the fighting force of the Zelensky regime. It is credibly estimated by Colonel Douglas Macgregor, who's been keeping a very close eye and somebody who would highly recommend that you follow. He's the only dissident American officer who is saying what is more or less happening here in Ukraine. And he credibly estimates that about 100,000 Ukraine soldiers are dead. And likely that same number, if not more, of wounded, incapacitated. So the original army is gone. And so, this is, I believe, and other people seem to agree with me, that this is basically the Kiev regime's last stand. This is like the Battle of the Bulge in World War II, where during the winter and into January of 1945, the Germans threw everything they had at the Allies on the West, and they exhausted themselves. And after that, they had no more army left, no more gas in the tank. And it was only 3-4 months later that the Allies were in Berlin. And it seems to me that this Battle of Kherson is that final bulge in this war. And frankly, they are throwing away the last of what they've got. And the worst part, the thing that really drives me crazy, that I find is just immoral and despicable, and I'm sorry for using such language, but it's the truth. It's immoral and despicable that they are throwing away the lives of these men just to score a political victory so that it helps Joe Biden and the Democratic establishment get a few more votes in the midterm election. It's all politics. It's not because they think that they can actually win, because they know that they can't. It's over. It's been over for weeks now. And all of these men who are dying for nothing, it's that. They are dying for nothing. And that's the tragedy and horror.
Well, they're not
and the
even,
men who have
Gonzalo,
made these decisions
they're not
are evil.
even, Gonzalo, they're not even dying for votes for Joe Biden, because all of the signs are that Biden, the Democrats, are going to get the mother of all beatings in the midterm elections in November. There was some hope a few weeks ago amongst Democrats that they could limit the losses. But it now looks, according to the betting markets, the polling, and the individual statewide polling, all indicate a wipeout of biblical proportions. So these men's lives are being sacrificed for a political purpose which isn't even working for Biden. How about that then?
Well, George, you see, you are a much more idealistic man than I am, because me, the cynic, I think of myself as pragmatic, but maybe what I'm about to say is deeply cynical. I think that the Biden administration is going to outright try to steal this election. I think that there's going to be gross electoral violations in this coming election, and they will try to sweep it under the rug, as they did in 2018, as they did in 2020. And I am not confident that it will be a straight election. And I would suspect that there's going to be such shenanigans that it will throw the outcome into serious political turmoil. I cannot believe that I'm saying this. I have never seen any kind of lawlessness as we are seeing now with the Biden administration, so I couldn't put it past them. I mean, something that if you told me this 5-10 years ago, I wouldn't have believed it. Now I do believe it, because of the actions of the Biden regime and how the Biden regime has politicized the FBI and other security agencies in the United States to politically persecute dissident voices. Today, or yesterday was it rather, a writer, I don't have his name offhand, but he was a writer writing about the evacuation of Afghanistan and the whole withdrawal of last year. He was visited by the FBI. He abruptly resigned from his position and he's disappeared. This is the kind of thing that we used to see in totalitarian states, and we're seeing it in the United States. In the United States of America, with the Constitution, First Amendment, all that stuff. And we are seeing open and grotesque political persecution of the government against the people. And we are seeing similar things going on across Europe. We're seeing huge protests across Europe by the people with just grievances, and they are being maligned, they are being repressed. The fact of these protests is being censored. You know, the West is dead. In all of the virtues and all of the principles have been thrown away.
Even worse, Gonzalo, even worse than being repressed, they're being completely ignored, as if their demonstrations, their protests didn't even happen. Orwell, thou should be with us at this hour. But Gonzalo Lira was, and what an hour it turned out to be. Thanks, Gonzalo, for filling in for me in the mother of all talk shows. Let me take some calls. Douglas is in Manchester on the Ukraine. Go ahead, Douglas.
Hi, George. I need you to bear with me because I've got a lot to get through here. I'll try and talk very quickly to be efficiently and not waste any of your time. So back during Syria, 2015, after the Russian intervention, I was very concerned back then, and it consumed pretty much all my time. And last week you said, get up off your arse. It's time to get up off your arse. And I thought, this time is worse. It's time to get up off my arse. This situation is imperative beyond all else, particularly this week. Ben Wallace, I've not had a chance to watch your show. I've been at the phone to make sure I got you. Steadfast Noon, Ben Wallace, it's getting worse and worse. And if you spend your time online, what they call the wokists are now just dogs on the leads of the neocons and democons, whatever you want to call them. I'm sure we agree on that. But what I do find is that there's been so much agreement but separation on independent platforms. And it's allowed a lot of distraction to get through, for instance, say, the message you have. And there's so many people here who agree on, if nothing else, this issue. You, Tucker Carlson, Russell Brand, Elon Musk, Trump, Roger Waters, the list goes on. And my feeling is to smash through this propaganda, a platform that does something to unify them all, where they'll throw everything at them, your Russian apologists, your appeasers, but it will start to be ridiculous, it would be a great idea to happen soon, because I don't think we have time. We don't know. It's an invisible gun over our heads. We don't have time to wait for the elections.
I'll tell you what, it's a very good point. And if Elon Musk or Roger Waters, the two richest men in that triptych of Galloway, Musk and Waters, are prepared to set up, if we could be broadcasting round the clock, the mother of all talk shows, followed by the Roger Waters show, followed by the Elon Musk show, and so on, then I think we would have a global reach and a global audience to reckon with, Douglas. I just myself have no money. I've got words, I've got energy, but I've got no money.
George, I remember your great work in the Brexit campaign. Fantastic work. To this day, I still show people that speech where the headlines at the time were, people were walking out when you and Farage got together. You said you agreed on nothing else but this issue. But the Brexit debate allowed you to come together. I don't think we have time to wait for an election that allows opposing figures like you and Farage, who, as far as Trump now, who he usually follows, has come out to say he's against nuclear war and everything. For me, a spark to this could be to create that situation again, either by you reaching out to Farage or someone like him, because he has been concentrating on trust at the minute. But I think to recreate that situation, I remember your great left, right, forward march speech where you won over that crowd. I think that could be a spark to this. People could see that in Britain, and then it could be a spark to saying, you know what, we need to unify left and right, the wider spectrum. And any way you can think of me getting involved, because all my attention goes to this as an imperative right now, so I can put any political capital as I have as just one man trying to, get away from the impending doom that we all see who are paying attention is coming closer and closer, with all sorts of talk of false flags and everything else and miscalculation and accidents. So I'm brought back to that time during Brexit. It was fantastic, and it might have won us the election, George. It might have won the Brexit vote.
Yeah, well, we did get 17.4 million votes, which is more than anyone else has ever got in Britain for anything. Douglas, a fascinating call. Make sure I know how to get back to you. Be in touch. please. The telephone numbers, if you're in the US or Canada, it's +1 844 944 3344. If you're in the UK or Ireland, it's 08081 965522. Let me go to, by the way, there's a poll running, and make sure that you get your vote in on it. It's fascinating. Will the Ukraine war be over by Christmas? Yes, 19%, no, 81% on YouTube. It is yes, 28%, no, 72%. And on Telegram, it's yes, 23%, no, 77%. I happen to think it will be over by Christmas. And some of the reasons for that were adumbrated by Gonzalo Lira earlier. And I'm also the man that said that Liz Truss would be out before Halloween. She'd disappear on a broom across the skyline, never to be seen again. I'm not sure she's even going to reach Saturday, never mind Halloween. Let's go to TJ in London on the UK-US special relationship. Go ahead, TJ.
Hi, George. Can you hear me?
Welcome. Go ahead. Yeah, very clear.
Boy, oh, great, George. Boy, George, sometimes you make me laugh even in this serious time. But I tell you something, George. I don't know what's going on. If I didn't know any better, I would think it's the rise of the Antichrist. Because, look, I mean, it seems like the politicians...
Well, maybe it is. Maybe it is, TJ. Maybe these are the end times.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, come on, George. Even some of the people in the world, it seems like they're in a trance. You would think people would be rising up. They can see the truth from your channel. People are excellent, Gonzalo Lira, the Duran. There's so many people out there that are speaking the truth. And if people do their research, they would see that it's all a lie. All this is a lie. But people seem to be in a trance. Government, parliament, the whole lot of them, America, UK is about to destroy themselves. What for?
Well, look, judging by the amount of cocaine that was discovered on the bathroom work surfaces in the British Parliament, maybe they are all literally in a trance. But people are waking up, TJ, I've got to tell you. Let's squeeze in Kevin in Suffolk on the same subjects before the break. Go ahead, Kevin.
George, don't squeeze me in. I wanted to go on a rant. I spent 5 minutes talking to your call screener. Right. Firstly, can you get Erebus as a co-host, because he's brilliant and I love his voice. Secondly,
so do I. He's kind of Barry White, don't you think? You see the trouble with me. I can't do nothing without my baby. Anyway, go on.
Right, George. You cheered me up tonight because, like, I'm just in despair, really. I don't know what we do about this situation in this country, that we cannot get representatives in Parliament. We cannot get people who reflect the views of the country, and it's never happened. I mean, I thought Boris was going to be good. I voted for Brexit because I wanted to shake things up, but they are just absolutely useless. And it's three parties in there with one agenda, and the Tories have. I mean, I now don't believe they ever seriously, that there was any attempt to seriously negotiate a Brexit. I can't believe May was as stupid as she seems to be. And what I was going to say to you was, like, you tell me, what do we do? I think that the dissident forces, you said the other day you're a dissident, and I accept now I am, because this country that I thought I loved, I thought, I was part of, this, it's just lost me. I'm just completely done. And what we've got to do somehow is
don't despair, because that's what they want you to do. I have proposed, and I propose it again now, a Liberty Alliance. I even set up a Twitter account called Liberty Alliance UK, I think. I will tweet it again tonight, and I repeat my call tonight. We need a once-off Liberty Alliance of all those who believe in freedom of speech, all those who believe in reforming the electoral system so that votes reflect and representation reflects the way people have voted. We need electoral reform. We need a halt to the increasing authoritarianism that's taking place in the country over, COVID passports and mandatory vaccinations and abuse of the right of freedom of speech, false reporting or zero reporting. There are things that we can agree on. And we need a Liberty Alliance that will fight for those things and in an election stand on a platform where we're not all standing against each other, cutting each other's throat, allowing the duopoly, the two cheeks of the same arse, to continue business as usual. Kevin, stay in touch with me. Tony, last call before the break in Liverpool. Go ahead, Tone.
Evening, George. Hope you're well, mate. My point is, we're looking around Europe, George, and we can see people rising up against the cost of living crisis which is ongoing, which has been created by the Europeans especially, and obviously in cahoots with the Americans. They're marching, they are exercised, they're unhappy. In this country, I'm amazed. Where are all these progressives supposed to be marching around London? They love to get out there and march, and stand up for rights. And yet, worst case scenario, worst case, inverted commas, we could be heading for a nuclear war. And where are these progressives? They sat at home. What are they watching? Jeremy Kyle on TV. Where are these people, George?
It's a very good question, Tony. I'll tell you where the General Secretary of the Trade Union Congress is. She's getting measured for the ermine robes in the House of Lords. Now we know why she's been so quiet. I'm so old. I remember when Baroness Frances O'Grady was a left-wing socialist, maybe more than that. But now she's Baroness Frances O'Grady. The leaders of the trade unions are suborned, all except, far as I can see, the leadership of the Railway Workers Union, the RMT, and one or two elements in the ASLEF and in Unite, although their General Secretary takes 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sometimes 1 step forward, 2 steps back. So I know where the labour movement is. It is suborned. The Corbynite formation has been destroyed and scattered to the 4 winds. Some are still in, some are out, but rootless and not active anymore. Many are disillusioned. I know that some have come to my own party, the Workers' Party, but not nearly enough of those. Many have dropped out of politics altogether. As to where the Stop the War movement is, or the CND, after all, we are talking about a potential nuclear war, clue in the name, campaign for nuclear disarmament. The last time we invited them onto the show, they refused to come on because I had voted for Nigel Farage in the European Parliament elections 3 or 4 years ago for the Brexit campaign. I'm not making it up, Tony, but I do need to take a break because I've got the one and only Peter Oborne coming up right after this on the Conservative government's meltdown. Stay tuned.
There is no trick other than hard work, creativity, care, and recognizing that duty is more important than love.
The booming voice of Robert Maxwell, an arrogant man who used his publishing empire to gain him power and influence. But in this shocking account, never told before in this way, George Galloway recalls his first encounter with Maxwell.
It looked like a grizzly bear advancing towards me and punches me with these giant fists, like sides of ham, right in the solar plexus. So hard that I literally bent double.
Then, after George exposed Maxwell as a crook in Parliament, it was war.
Every one of his papers, the Daily Mirror, then following the Sunday Mirror, the Sunday People, the Daily Record, then a few days later the Sunday Mail in Scotland. Even the European, which he then owned. All over Galloway.
Scottish Daily News journalist Ron Mackay was there.
Every night, presumably when he had a drink in him, he would boom over the tannoy about the cretins, the fools. The majority of the workforce believed that he would take it over and their jobs would be secure. But of course he didn't. He just disappeared.
And then...
The millionaire newspaper publisher Robert Maxwell is dead.
What really happened? Did Robert Maxwell jump, or was he pushed?
It could be that he went out to, as he did, micturate over the side of the boat. I'm with Ghislaine Maxwell in that I lean towards the murder.
This is Maxwell, the monster.
You said, what is my secret? I will let you and your viewers know what it is. I'm not attached to property. Consequently, losing or gaining it means nothing to me.
Now, that first hour of the mother of all talk shows, Midweek, came to you thanks to my good friend Ravi and Regenerative Living. They are a remarkable outfit. Check them out, their website, 220km.com, 220km.com. They're dedicating their resources to providing us with the most unique and nutrient-rich ingredients and cosmetics that we have ever used. Nature's ingredients simplified. They really are as green and wholesome as they sound, and part of their profits go towards regenerating native ecosystems to where they once were before we started to control and destroy them. I say ingredients and cosmetics because although the cosmetics are responsible for my shining visage looking at you right now, they're actually about to bring out foods, and that's why I mention ingredients. And they're with us for at least the next 2 months, and I'm deeply grateful to you, Ravi, for that. Check them out on their website, 220km. The poll results are remarkable, I think. They are overwhelmingly of the view that the Ukraine war will not be over by Christmas. I have a feeling that I'm right and you who are voting on this poll are wrong. The one thing that is absolutely certain is that the skids are under the British government as it still struts around the international stage, issuing threats and démarches and ultimata. Inside their own parliament, they are literally fighting each other and insulting Jacob Rees-Mogg, lèse-majesté. But we have the prince of political commentators with us now. He is the one and only Peter Oborne, a man of, I think he'll forgive me if I describe him as of conservative bearing, but a man very much at odds with the recent Conservative government. He joins me now after an absence of some months. Peter Oborne, thank you for being with us on what has turned out to be a rather auspicious evening. Give me your summary of where stands now the British Conservative government.
Well, you followed just as much as I have, George, the events of the last few hours. And what we've seen is really the collapse of an already collapsing administration. We've seen let's go through it. So we've had the resignation of the Home Secretary, which seems a minor matter. We've had, in comparison to something, shoving and pushing and alleged intimidation in the voting lobbies involving the Conservative Party. We've apparently had, although reports contradict this, the resignation of the chief whip. We've and we have a prime minister who can't cope. I mean, it is worth asking. The Conservative Party has been, the party which has governed Britain more than any other, the most successful party in many ways in the Western world for the last 200 years. The party of Winston Churchill, of Margaret Thatcher, Benjamin Disraeli before then, and I'm wondering whether this is it.
Yes, I wonder about that, because it's really two parties in one. I mean, both the major parties have historically been two parties, at least two, inside one big tent. That is a product of our first past the post electoral system. But perhaps there is a last straw which breaks the camel's back. And looking at right-wing Twitter and knowing people to the right of you in the Conservative ranks as I do, I'm wondering if this is a breaking point, Peter.
Well, if there was an election tomorrow morning, and I don't think we can rule out the possibility now there'll be a general election, because the Conservative Party is consumed by such bitter hatred. The Conservatives might win one seat in a parliament of 650, perhaps not even one seat. So that's the situation as we stand, according to the polls before the debacle today, is that the Conservative Party won't win. It would not get returns at all. Maybe Rishi Sunak, who has, I think, the safest seat in the country, maybe he would, Richmond. But I don't think that even he would get back.
At least that would make him the leader.
That would solve a lot of problems, because, of course, I assume what is happening now, George, you know better than me, experienced parliamentarian that you are, but they must have decided and be telling Liz Truss now that you must go. But the difficulty is, the reason she's staying there is what replaces her. What do they do? What if she says, no, I'm not going to go? And how do they dismantle her, force her out? And then how do they arrange a bloodless coup, a succession where they don't fight over who gets the next job?
Well, of course, there are many barriers to forcing her out on paper. But as the famous Liverpool manager Bill Shankly said, on paper we should beat them, but football's not played on paper, it's played on grass. And politics is played on the grass of the turf of the House of Commons. So even if the rules say that Liz Truss cannot be no confidence for 12 months, water always finds a way to flow downhill, and will do if the political weather really has profoundly changed, as you and I both think it has. So it wouldn't be difficult to force her out. The men in grey suits, women in grey suits, show up and say, you literally have no support left, Liz, go now, before we have to organise empty benches behind you in Parliament, before we have to table a no-confidence motion in the House itself against you. There are many ways that they could force her out. But the bloodless coronation, well, that is the problem, isn't it? I dare say the MPs could do it, because the MPs never wanted Liz Truss in the first place. They wanted Rishi Sunak. The problem is the members in the country do not want Rishi Sunak. The members in the country think we should be ruling India, not that an Indian should be ruling us. The members in the country want Boris Johnson, not Rishi Sunak. That's why I say we may be close to a breaking point, Peter.
That's right. I think that, and by the way, remember the MPs themselves, they're not all the kind of Rishi Sunak supporters. You looked at the way that Suella Braverman, who is used her brief time as Home Secretary to wage war on liberty and freedom and pursue an authoritarian, in my view, bigoted agenda. She's not going to want to roll in behind Rishi Sunak or Jeremy Hunt, whoever it may be. And there's plenty like her. I think what happened is that the far right captured quite a lot of the Conservative Party. And so it's now likely to split between the kind of the libertarian financialized wing of the party, which generated that budget, which enfranchised the super rich, and then the more conservative, traditionally conservative wing of the party. It may be splitting as we speak, or maybe they're going to try and come together to save their skins. It's my view. I don't know if you agree with me, is that we do need a general election. They don't have any credibility. These people have done the most terrible damage to our country, and they aren't fit. I mean, really, they couldn't run. I mean, as I know, because I love pubs, I go to the pub. Pubs, you require a lot of skill and attention and a human empathy to run a decent pub. These people couldn't run our local pub, let alone this country.
Well, that's true, of course, on both sides of the House, and herein lies the trouble with a general election. Of course, I support a general election. I think this government has lost its mandate. It has thrown it away, as a matter of fact. I mean, Boris Johnson, I know you don't like him. Boris Johnson returned a landslide victory for the Conservatives not that long ago, but it's all been thrown away. It's all been wasted. And it now has effectively no authority to govern. As you say, it can't even govern its own affairs inside its own party. Definitely couldn't run a convivial public house and cannot run an effective government. My problem is that I don't believe that Keir Starmer and his Labour front bench is any better, and that Britain faces a Tweedledee, Tweedledum choice. And so I think we're in a bleak place, Peter. Not since 1940, 41, when we were existentially challenged, have we been in a worse place than this. But then we had men of the calibre of Mr. Churchill and Mr. Attlee and Mr. Bevin, and so on. We simply don't have such people on the political front line now.
I understand what you're saying, and I share many of your reservations about Mr. Starmer. You will have seen the Labour Files documentary, which I appeared in, which made me feel that I would be uncomfortable with Mr. Starmer, the way he's treated honourable Labour activists, and I've said my say on that. But we are doing, and we do face it is not a war in like 1940, but I do believe we're facing the greatest social, economic, political, constitutional crisis of your lifetime and mine. And you really to ask Liz Truss or whoever might succeed her to do that job is wrong. And although Mr. Starmer, I have my reservations, which I've just outlined, I do think that him and the Labour front bench are not responsible for the complete and terrible shambles which we're now going through. And the problem fundamentally is economic at the moment. and I would trust that. I wouldn't trust Miss Truss or Kwasi Kwarteng or whoever with the mortgage. They're going to drive it up. If you're a business person, you feel that they're likely to send you bankrupt, and therefore I would prefer, speaking as a conservative, to have Labour and Sir Keir Starmer in charge of things at the moment. Very much so.
You mentioned earlier the hatreds. I'd like to drill down, if I can, with you, what these hatreds are about. Is this all about Brexit? Is it unreconciled differences over the European Union?
I think if you look at what happened at Brexit, and I think both you and I voted for Brexit, George, and both of us have got to ask a deep question about ourselves, whether we put this country in a disastrous direction, perfectly honourably, because we believed what we were doing, but fatally for Britain. Now, there have been three iterations, really, of Brexit. First of all, we had Theresa May, who wanted to strike a deal with Europe, have a pragmatic Brexit, and that was destroyed by Johnson, who you have a higher opinion of than me. Johnson tried to actually have the nearest thing which you might have liked. I can see that, a Brexit for the kind of workers of Northern England, a levelling up Brexit. And although he never really showed how he could do it, he was brought down by the fact that he was a pathological liar, and the way he conducted himself as Prime Minister was wholly improper and unacceptable. So he went because he lied. And then we got the third iteration of Brexit, which has been libertarian Brexit, the Brexit of the hedge fund managers, the Brexit of Mayfair, the Brexit, and of course that went calamitously wrong straight away. And we've had three attempts at Brexit. And I have to say to you, and I respect your position, I can see it was an honourable one, and mine, but were we very naive, and do we now have to think? I suggest to you that Brexit decision has led to the national humiliation. Let's be honest about it. Today's national humiliation. But Britain is now tonight the laughingstock of the world. Every vestige of dignity or of ability to say this is how you should do things is gone. And do we have to, you and I, to say to each other, we got it wrong?
Well, I think you're half right, but the half that you're wrong is that the European Union is in an even worse state than we are. Its politicians, Borrell, addressing the European Parliament this week, described Europe as a garden and the rest of the world as a jungle, the heart of darkness. They are embroiled in hyper war, economic war against Russia, which has beggared their own people. The European Union is a malfunctioning catastrophe. So to say we should have stayed in it in order to avoid our national humiliation seems to me to make no sense, Peter.
As always, one of the reasons I regard you so highly, George, is that you refer to things which the national press, the mainstream press, don't mention. So this outrageous series of statements by the most senior diplomat in the European Union, which is basically racist and colonialist, which has been ignored. Have you seen in the mainstream British press? And it's deeply troubling. I accept that about the European Union. I don't accept. If you're talking about Ukraine, you have to understand. You would have to accept that Britain is one with the rest of Europe over Ukraine. That is not a Brexit issue, therefore.
No, it isn't. But the European Union is now electing the likes of the new Italian Premier, the countries of Hungary and Poland, and Croatia and Slovakia are crying out against Brussels and its enforcement actions against them on issues like immigration or other social policy issues, woke issues, greenery issues, and so on. The fissures inside the remaining members of the European Union are very profound, and their political leaders are no better than ours. They're just as bad as ours, I should say.
I wonder about that. If you look at as I say, the fundamental crisis at the moment is an economic crisis. You are not seeing that level of economic mismanagement, nothing like it in Europe, as you are in this country, which has simply under the Conservatives, the governance of Liz Truss and the Conservatives taken leave of its senses. And what tells you that is bond yields and the strength of the currency, that something has gone nightmarishly wrong in this country. Now, you are right. There are very serious problems in Europe. You could have added, of course, the naked Islamophobia of Macron in France, which has been very troubling and dishonored the French nation. But I still would say to you that you've got to trace this national calamity, which the scenes of total shame and chaos in the House of Commons today, and what's preceded it, and what is going to come, because we're going through something. It's not over yet. It's going to get worse. Should you not trace it to that fateful decision in June 2016?
I absolutely don't. I don't resile from my stand on Brexit and for self-government, which is my principal reason for having supported Brexit. I'm a Bennite. I was a Bennite before, and I'm a Bennite now. I believe that if you cannot remove the people that govern you, then you are not living in a democracy. We can now remove this government that governs us. We could not remove Mr. Borrell. If we'd remained in the European Union, Mr. Borrell would have been speaking for us in the colonial, Kipling-esque, a bit farcical, Peter, because the real colonialists in the later period of colonialism didn't really regard Spaniards as quite like us, a bit dusky, a bit jungly themselves. It is one of the great ironies that a Spanish socialist could be speaking in the words and the terms that would have made Kipling blush. It was rank, heart of darkness, Joseph Conrad, Orientalism, colonialism, racism, and he would have been speaking for us if we had still been in the European Union.
Well, unfortunately, you will agree that if you look at members of the Liz Truss's front bench, we have our own politicians saying exactly the same thing. And it does make you reflect that maybe the reason why it hasn't become a story, apart from your conversation with mine now, it hasn't become at all a story in the mainstream British press, is because they agree with this racist diplomat, the most senior diplomat in Europe. They're not offended by the terrible things he said. And of course, you're right. You talk about the irony of France, but let's remember that there was you talk about the irony of Spain, but let's reflect that there was, a Spanish empire, and where did Franco turn up from in 1936? He hops over the Mediterranean from Morocco, from the Spanish Empire in Morocco. So, and if you go back deeper to then, you can think of the terrible things which the Spaniards did to the people of South America. And so there is a appalling legacy of imperialism and colonialism. And I think probably we're safe to call it genocide when you go back into the Spanish past.
Absolutely, absolutely. 100 million people were wiped out in the Americas after Columbus discovered it. 100 million from Chile to Canada lost their lives. A cultural genocide and an actual genocide carried out by Spanish, French, and of course British settler colonialism. Without a doubt, Peter, I could talk to you all night, but we better let someone else have a chance. Thanks very much for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. God bless you. Peter Oborne, let me know what you think. Here's some big news. Manchester United 2, Tottenham Hotspur 0. How wonderful is that? I better take a break. I'm 6 minutes late in doing so. Peter says the Afghan people have lost, George. I thought you were better than this, to be honest. Give me a call, Peter. Tell me what you mean. And Oliver says, for some reason, George was on the jihadist side when it came to Yugoslavia. And that's the reason I will never trust him. I fought against the war on Yugoslavia with all my breath and all my heart. Me and Tony Benn and Jeremy Corbyn and others were practically the only people in this country opposing the war on Yugoslavia, the destruction of Yugoslavia. How dare you, you imbecile? If you have any guts, you'll pick up the phone right now and call this show and justify that utter slander. Really.
It's for me, sir. Where's the cheese pizza, Robinson? Come on, what are the public paying you for? Oh, and get another virgin colada while you're there. There's a good chap. No, who's ringing the old burner phone? Hello? How did you get this number, Ghislaine? No, that's impossible. I can't possibly fly to New York. Why? Oh, I've got to go. My pizza will be here any minute. I'm not sweating, you're sweating. Ghislaine, don't call again. Robinson? Sir. Come here with that moist towelette. It's getting a bit hot for my liking.
Here? Where am I?
Welcome to St. Peter's Gate, my son.
Is this one of that Hillary's tricks, that devil?
Be still, my son. The Clintons cannot hurt you here. You are safe with me in heaven.
Oh, heck. Knew I shouldn't have taken Bob's homemade vaccine. Oh, Lord have mercy. I am not worthy.
Before you pass on, you may ask any question you desire.
Anything?
With my omniscient knowledge, I can tell you anything you wish to know.
Well, Lord, you gotta tell me. All-powerful creator of this universe, before you judge me, I've been searching for answers my whole life.
Yes, my child.
I have to know. Who shot JFK?
Another one. It was a lone gunman by the name of Lee Harvey Oswald. He was not a government agent, and there was no second shooter on that grassy knoll in Dallas.
My God! This goes higher up than we thought!
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, this remarkable evening has gotten more remarkable. The Chief Whip and Deputy Chief Whip of the government have unresigned. They have been, quote, persuaded to stay. You couldn't make it up. Here's the phone numbers. If you're in the US or Canada, +1 844 944 3344. If you're in the UK or Ireland, 08 081 965522. The poll is getting remarkable numbers, I must say, counting the community poll, I think, and the poll on the night. More than 10,000 people have voted, and again, it is overwhelming. 3/4 or more, 4/5 on Twitter, that the war in Ukraine will not be over by Christmas. Let's see if I'm right and you are wrong. Super chats are coming in. This is your last chance to give on Super Chat and write your name into the annals of the history of the mother of all talk shows, which goes right back to January of 2006. J. Matson Heininger donated $10. Thank you, Mr. Galloway. Don't forget, he says, to check out J. Matson Heininger for free on Substack, A Builder's Tale. Will do. BMK donated 10 New Zealand dollars. Congratulations on getting fully sponsored. Keep up the great work. Brent in New Zealand. Thanks, Brent. John Flanders donated $2. Thanks for all your work, George. And Karim Al-Nashi donated £8.99. Wallah, Karim, thank you so much. Rudolph Grasspointer donated €10. Thank you. Michael Jeffrey donated $2. Long live MOATS, says Michael. Thank you. Tano13 or 113 donated £4.49. MOATS has an essential part of my weekly routine for almost 3 years. Your insightful analysis and opinions are a crucial breath of fresh air. Thank you for that. Peter Moss donated £5, worth every penny. God bless. Thanks, Peter. And Mick A donated £5. So pleased that you have sponsors, but support is a pleasure and truth a revelation. Thank you so much, Mick. Now, back to the phone lines. Anthony in Dorset on Ben Wallace. What's happened to Ben Wallace? Has he resigned? Go ahead, Anthony.
Possibly by now, George. Good evening. Thanks for taking my call. I'm sure you've noticed in the mainstream media the last couple of weeks, there's been endless speculation that Russia may be about to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Now, obviously, it's speculation. There's never any evidence or root to that. But anyway, speculation. So just put that thought aside for a moment. Now, this week, I believe he's still in Washington. Ben Wallace went for a sudden meeting with his counterpart, which was described by one of his juniors as conversations they were having would be beyond belief. Now, given that the West has already given endless amounts of money and weapons, it's put sanctions, it's blown up pipelines, excluded Russia from the SWIFT system, etc., etc. What do they mean, or what could they mean by conversations concerning Ukraine which are beyond belief? And in that, I come back to my earlier comment on this speculation that's been going on. Now, are they going to make, when I say they, are we, the West, going to make that speculation into a reality? And my question to you, George, and you're better at analysing these things than anybody else, how far do you think the West will go? Are they going to make that speculation into a reality?
I don't think they'll go as far as you are fearing, Anthony.
I do fear, George. I do fear.
One has to imagine. One has to imagine that in the military, at least, hopefully in the deep state more widely, but in the military at least, there is no appetite to bring about the end of the world over the issue of Kupiansk being in Russia or in Ukraine. It is an absurdity if you put it that way, but that would be the way that if anyone was left alive to write the history would be written. That the world ended over Izium, over an alphabet soup of Ukrainian words and names that no one had ever heard of before 8 months, 9 months ago. No one can spell, few can pronounce, and no one could point to on a map. Moreover, places which have been in 4 different countries in the last 100 years. The idea that humanity would be brought to its demise over such questions is, one would have thought, beyond any possibility of being allowed to happen, at least by the men in brass who would have to do the actual firing and pressing of the triggers and buttons. So I don't think it will go as far as you fear. You might ask yourself why this official was telling us that the conversations were beyond belief. Perhaps if they really were beyond belief, he wouldn't be telling us so. Perhaps this was crazy Dick Nixon talk. Nixon in his dotage in the last days of his presidency and his drunken ramblings with Kissinger was quite open about the fact that he used as a deliberate political ploy the wide belief that Nixon was so crazy he could do anything. He might launch anything at anybody. So there may be a bit of that going on. One thing I'm sure of, and no one's paying me to say this, I know that you know that, but just for the ill-intentioned, I'm not paid anything to take the view I'm about to express. I believe that Putin and Lavrov are far, far too statesmanlike to be contemplating launching nuclear weapons. I don't believe they want to bring about the end of their country, their nation, which would of course be a necessary concomitant to the end of our country and our nation. I don't believe that they want to do that or that they will do that. The only circumstance in which Russia would use its nuclear weapons would be if NATO were literally invading Russia with the intention of breaking it up in the way that they broke up Yugoslavia, which is the dream of the Ben Wallaces of this world. But as I don't believe that NATO could command the consensus in its ranks for such a world-ending series of events, I don't believe that these eventualities will occur. On the contrary, I'm optimistic. I believe that Russia will win sweeping military victories by conventional means over the next 6 weeks to 10 weeks, and that therefore, by Christmas, the decision will have been made to negotiate an ending and the saving of what would then be left of a Western Ukrainian state. We'll see if I'm right. Anthony, thank you for your call and the way that you put it. Megan is in Winchester. Let's take her next. Go ahead, Megan.
Hello, George. Good evening. My question to you tonight is why the journalists in the mainstream media seem so content to ignore the outrage of Julian Assange's incarceration when it directly attacks the future of their own profession.
Well, to use a word that was used by the Honourable Peter Oborne not half an hour ago, these journalists to whom you refer are prostitutes. They are whores. They have literally sold themselves, rented themselves at best, sold themselves at worst, and are echoing the prevailing orthodoxy shared by their proprietors, their owners, and the state, the deep state and the political state, both sides of the House of Commons. So, in short, they're not journalists in the way that you or I would understand that term, and in the way that Julian Assange surely was a journalist. The great Irish journalist Claude Coburn said that the proper relationship of the journalist to the state is that of the dog to the lamppost. That's the job of a journalist. As Coburn said, nothing is true until it has been officially denied. Our so-called journalists take the entirely opposite point of view. They are urinating, micturating on us on behalf of the state and their proprietors, and nothing is true if it has been officially denied. And anyone who insists on a contrary point of view has to be slandered, if not slain. And in the case of Julian, I fear, slain. He is in a grave and perilous state of ill health. And if he is sent to the Supermax penitentiary in Boulder, Colorado, he will surely perish. And you say that what's happened to Julian is a threat to them. I'm sorry, Megan, it isn't a threat to them because they have no intention of reporting the truth in the way that Julian Assange may well have given his life for having done. Thanks for the call. Simon is in London on UK politics. Go ahead, Simon.
How you doing, George? You okay, mate?
All good, sir. Been a good show tonight, I think.
That's great. Yeah, I was just going to say, you were kicked out rather unfairly from the Labour Party because you rightly asked soldiers to refuse to fight. Correct me if I'm wrong. Now, some may criticise you for being unpatriotic.
You are wrong, yeah. I didn't, let me stop you. I was kicked out for 5 reasons, one of which was my call on the British Armed Forces not to obey illegal orders. And of course, it is a legal duty to refuse illegal orders, and has been ever since Nuremberg. Go on, Simon. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's absolutely fine. Some may criticise you for being unpatriotic, but your opinion matches a lot of people, and indeed matches that of a lot of military veterans who've seen the horrors of war. Now, the government, whether it be Labour or Tory or the Woken Democrats, let's face it, really don't care about the life of a soldier and view them as nothing more than cannon fodder. And this was clearly evident a few months ago when Liz Truss, I think I spoke to you about this previously on your show, she acted, and rather foolishly, I encouraged people who want to go to fight in Ukraine to go, even though it's totally illegal. And if this doesn't convince people just how stupid this lady is, this week she fired Johnny Mercer, who's done some work for the veterans in the military and so on. And while she did it, she giggled and laughed while she fired Johnny Mercer, who himself is a military veteran. He's seen military service, Does this not show people just how arrogant this lady is? And but people of her ilk in the Conservative Party and indeed other parties such as Labour and the Woken Democrats actually are,
Well, a very powerful series of points there. Nobody could be more patriotic than me. I'm even wearing a blue tie. I'm the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain, clue being in the name. We have no master other than the working class of Britain. We supported Brexit because we believe in Britain. We believe in the British. We love our language. We love our culture. We even love our football, particularly Manchester United, but everywhere from Inverness Caledonian Thistle to Plymouth Argyle. We have an encyclopedic knowledge and love for them all. We are seeking to build a new Jerusalem here in this green and pleasant land, not in Latin America or in Southeast Asia, but here in this green and pleasant land. And I promise you, as a former boy soldier myself, no one could be more considerate of the poor bloody infantry that are sent by these politicians to fight these unjust wars than me. And as a matter of fact, we have a very considerable number, certainly proportionately a considerable number, of ex-servicemen in our own Workers' Party. But thanks, Simon, for the opportunity to say that. Saad is in Virginia in the United States. Go ahead, Saad.
Hi, Mr. Galloway. This is Saad again. I just wanted to mention a few points that prior to the referendum, I was actually telling a couple of my friends about this idea that the Russia was probably going to annex few provinces, but it may be possible that they might hold on to it for 10, 15 years so that they can coerce Ukraine into not joining the NATO. Because if they have few of their provinces that are Russian control, it might be unlikely that they will actually join the NATO. But on the other hand side, one more thing that I did want to point out is that earlier somebody was talking about the nuclear crisis. I was just going to say about that, even though it may be very unlikely, but if Russia does decide to put the nuclear weapons in Cuba, this is not going to be like the 1950s and 60s, because today, with the hypersonic missile technology, nuclear cruise missiles that are 3-4 times the supersonic speed, and these capabilities, oh man, it's only in Florida, coast is only 250, 300 some miles away from Cuba. It will be within a matter of few minutes that it will be so imminent. So, but again, that's another question.
Well, it would be much faster than that, Sad. Cuba is 90 miles from the United States, and the entire state of Florida could be incinerated not in minutes, but barely in seconds. Not only are these missiles exponentially faster than the missiles that Khrushchev put in Cuba in 1960, the firepower of the missiles is 1,000 times greater than the atomic bombs that the United States dropped on Japan twice, in Hiroshima and in Nagasaki. So no one should imagine that if the nuclear weapons begin flying, that anyone will survive. As I pointed out just on the Sunday show, one single missile with multiple warheads would be in Britain. I think the figure is 8 minutes from firing. And those multiple warheads would incinerate all of Britain's major cities in an instant. Nothing would be left alive. And those not living in those cities would soon die in the nuclear winter and from the radiation that would ensue. So anyone who wants to fight a nuclear war is literally clinically insane. And to want to do so, not because your own country was threatened, your own interests were threatened, but over Kupiansk and Izium, seriously? You'd have to be insane to want to do that. And if they are insane, they shouldn't be anywhere near the nuclear weapons, the triggers for which they carry around in handbags and have to be close by them all the time. So thanks, Saad, for that. I don't believe that that will happen. But if it happens, it's good night, Irene, for all of us. And it's been nice knowing you all, but none of us will know anyone ever again. We'll never know if our children might have grown up into beautiful and talented people. I'll never know whether my son would ever have played for Celtic or Manchester United, I will know nothing, and my son will be nothing. We will be radioactive dust. And you have to ask yourselves why. We have a parliament in Britain, virtually every single member of which is gung-ho behind this Ukraine war. Not a single member of parliament, not one, not even Jeremy Corbyn, is talking to you in the way I am now about this question. So you have to ask yourself whether our politics is so shrunken, so emaciated, so starved that we have effectively ceased to be a democracy. After all, you're not a democracy if there's only one song being sung. If no one can be found in the Parliament House to even raise questions, never mind chart a different way forward, whether we are living in a democracy at all. That's really the question that I have been trying to ask. I've got the front page of tomorrow's Rupert Murdoch Sun paper. Do you want to see it? Let's have a look. No, we haven't got that graphic up yet, it appears. Ah, there it is. Marvellous. Marvellous. Peter Sheck donated $20. God bless you, George, and all your guests. Thank you, Peter. And the great Albert Sontag donated again $10. Great way to break the week in two, George, with some keen analysis on the dreadful situations that we face. Steeler UK donated £10. The hokey cokey must be the favourite dance of the Tories. In, out, they're shaking it all about. Zach Boyles gives $4.99. F the EU, most of us assumed, was an off-the-cuff comment. Turns out it was actually a tactical plan. P.S. Cheers to the new sponsor. He seems cool. He totally is cool, Zach. That is, I mean, God sent him to us. He might not like me saying that, but this man could not be a better fit if he was a glove on my hand. He is super cool, as are his products. Time for a couple of calls, I think. Let's go to the US and talk with Jason. Go ahead, Jason.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Nice to hear from you. What would you like to say?
I had, like, concerning you had like a small speech concerning nuclear war and like the fact that everything would be destroyed. So I went on Omegle recently and I was on this tab called like a Trump tab just to see like who's online. And there's like a lot of fundamentally like genuinely racist people. Like I've never experienced genuine actual racism to a point where someone would be like, hey, I want to literally exterminate the Jews. Literally like so content and downright just wanting to raise his kids on the same ideology and he's like proud of it. I have never experienced that in my life. So I told him, I was like, what's the point of doing that if you know that everything is finite and temporary and nuclear war is on the brink and, you know, everything will just be destructed? Why not be a man of faith, be a man of honor, be a man of dignity, take care of your family, like be respected, you know, be a good person. And I don't know, he was just like, so my children can survive, so my lineage can survive, so my ancestors and the future human beings who will look like me will have the same ideology and I will live on in this world. And I'm like I don't know. I really don't have an explanation for it concerning what you were talking about.
Well, of course there are such people, and one of them was on his feet as the European Union's chief diplomat. I'm not joking. This very week when he described the people outside Europe as living in a jungle, whilst we live in a garden. he described the people living outside Europe as being savages in the heart of darkness. I'm not making this up. That's what he said. And he's a Spaniard. The Germans, the British, the Americans, they look down their nose at Spaniards. They might think they are outside the garden. But the truth is, Europe is not a garden. Europe is a jungle. Have you seen the streets of Europe of late? Did you see the thousands of French cops with their clubs out, smashing down peaceful protesters in Paris and elsewhere in France? Just yesterday, people that were out protesting against the cost of living, against the war, were savagely beaten by the French police. We do it differently here. We just pretend the demonstration never happened, don't report it, and therefore only those that were on it ever know what the message of the protest and the demonstration was. But if we needed to, I feel sure we would club them down exactly as the French did. Have you seen the poverty in this garden of which Borrell speaks? Have you seen the poor and hungry children in this garden? Have you seen the fearful old age pensioners facing a long and bitter winter without the means of keeping themselves warm? Have you seen the environmental degradation in this garden? And of course, neither is outside of Europe a jungle. Have you seen the development in China? Have you seen the beauty of a re-emerging Latin America? Have you seen the joie de vivre of the people of the Latin American countries as they find their way towards their own independent path of development? Have you seen Africa? Far from being the heart of darkness, it's the next place where the sun is going to rise. Africa is where the greatest treasures on the earth are to be found. Africa will be the great continent of tomorrow and of the years and decades are to come. The sun is rising not in Europe, Mr. Borrell. It is Europe that is the basket case, with falling population, with sexual ambiguity, with record divorce rates, broken families, fatherless families, and all the other social ills that we are afflicted by. We have leaders that can't even tell you what a woman is. That's how bad things are in our garden, Mr. Borrell. Well, that's all I've got time for. I'm sorry about one or two technical issues tonight, but I hope they did not detract from your enjoyment of what I think has been a thoroughly good show. I certainly haven't been short of material. I'll need to come back on Sunday at 7 p.m. UK time for the mother of all talk shows. See you Sunday. Have a good night.